The Tragedy of Icarus Explained. The boy who was murdered by his father. It is a neat, simple, and comforting story, but the truth is rarely so simple. What if the wings did not fail because of the sun? What if they were designed to fail? What if the tragedy of Icarus was not an accident, but an execution? A carefully orchestrated murder committed not by the gods, not by fate, but by the one man he trusted most in the world, his own father. Today we look beyond the fable and into the heart of a brilliant, tormented, and dangerously proud inventor. We will unveil a story not of a foolish boy, but of a brilliant son whose potential became a threat. This is not a tale of hubris. This is a tale of jealousy, of sabotage, and of a father who would rather see his legacy fall from the sky than be surpassed by it. Welcome to Mythos Unveiled. Today we seek to explain the tragedy of Icarus, not as a lesson in obedience, but as the final, terrible invention of a murderous father. To understand the fall of Icarus, we must first understand the mind of the man who built his wings. Daedalus. He was not merely a craftsman. He was the greatest inventor the mortal world had ever known. A genius whose mind saw the world not as it was, but as a collection of problems to be solved, of systems to be improved, of natural laws to be bent and broken. He was a man who could craft statues that moved and breathed, who could devise tools that seemed to work by magic. He was, in essence, a mortal who thought like a god, and that was his greatest strength and his most profound tragedy. His story begins in Athens, where his brilliance was already legendary. But genius often walks hand in hand with a dark and corrosive pride. Daedalus could not bear to be second best. He had a nephew, his own sister's son, named Talos. The boy was a prodigy, an apprentice who showed signs of surpassing even his master. At the tender age of 12, Talos observed the spine of a fish and from it invented the saw. He invented the potter's wheel, the compass. His ingenuity was effortless, natural, intuitive. Daedalus watched this blossoming genius, and he did not feel pride. He felt a cold, creeping dread. He saw not a successor, but a replacement. He saw a future where his own name would be overshadowed. And so, in a fit of jealous rage that would come to define his life, he led his young nephew to the top of the Acropolis and, under the guise of showing him the view, pushed him from the edge. Athena, who favored inventors, saw the act. To save the boy, she transformed him into a partridge as he fell. But the crime was committed. Murder. A stain upon his soul that could never be washed away. To escape justice, Daedalus fled Athens, an exile carrying the heavy burden of his sin. He found refuge on the island of Crete, ruled by the powerful and cunning King Minos. Here, his genius was not just welcomed, it was demanded. Minos was a king with dark secrets, and he needed an inventor who was not afraid to create monstrous things. The king's wife, Pasiphae, had been cursed by the gods to fall in love with a magnificent white bull. Consumed by this unnatural lust, she begged Daedalus to help her. And Daedalus, his moral compass already broken, obliged. He constructed a hollow wooden cow, so lifelike that it fooled the bull. From this unholy union, a monster was born. The Minotaur, a creature with the body of a man and the head of a bull. King Minos was horrified and ashamed. He needed to hide this creature, to imprison it so that the world would never know of his family's disgrace. He turned again to Daedalus. And Daedalus, the man who had created the problem, was now tasked with creating its solution. He designed and built his magnum opus, the labyrinth. It was not merely a maze. It was an architectural nightmare, a puzzle of stone and shadow so complex, so ingeniously confusing, that once inside, no living thing could ever find its way out. Daedalus himself, its creator, was said to have nearly gotten lost within its winding corridors. Into this prison, the Minotaur was cast, and Daedalus, the great inventor, became the king's most valued and most dangerous asset. And it was on this island, in the shadow of this great terrible monument to his own genius and moral failure, that his son, Icarus, grew from a boy into a young man. Icarus grew up in the royal court of Crete, but it was a gilded cage. He was the son of a celebrated genius, yet also the son of an exiled murderer. He lived in luxury, yet he and his father were, in essence, prisoners of King Minos. The king valued Daedalus too much to ever let him leave. The inventor knew too many of the crown's dark secrets, the origin of the Minotaur, the design of the labyrinth. He was indispensable, and therefore he was trapped. Icarus was a bright, curious, and adventurous boy. He did not possess his father's cold, calculating intellect, but he had a different kind of brilliance. He had a passion for life, a fearless spirit, and an intuitive understanding of the world. While Daedalus saw the world as a machine to be taken apart, Icarus saw it as a wonder to be experienced. He would watch his father in his workshop, a place filled with marvelous, half-finished inventions, gears and levers, strange metals and mysterious concoctions. He learned from his father, but he was not his father's shadow. He would often ask questions that Daedalus found naive. "Father, why do you build walls? Why not wings?" Daedalus would often grow impatient with his son. He saw the boy's free spirit not as a virtue, but as a lack of discipline. He saw his son's effortless charm and charisma, qualities he himself lacked, and the old, familiar poison of jealousy began to stir once more. He loved his son, yes, but it was a possessive, controlling love. He saw Icarus as his greatest creation, a legacy to be molded in his own image, not a free individual with a mind of his own. As Icarus grew into a handsome, capable young man, he began to resent their imprisonment. He longed for the world beyond Crete, for the freedom to travel, to explore, to live a life not dictated by the whims of King Minos or the dark past of his own father. "We cannot stay here forever, father," he would plead. "You are the greatest inventor in the world. Surely you can devise a means of escape." The Cretan dialogues, a supposed collection of conversations between the two, record a poignant exchange. Icarus says, "You have conquered stone and wood. Why not the sky?" Daedalus is said to have replied, "The sky has no walls, my son. It has no rules. It is a realm of chaos, fit only for gods." The truth was, Daedalus had been thinking of escape for years, but he was a cautious man, a planner. The sea was not an option. Minos's navy controlled every port, every shipping lane. The land was an island. The only path to freedom, as his son so often pointed out, was up. The sky. The idea was a dangerous one, an act of supreme hubris, an attempt to claim a domain that belonged only to the gods. It was a challenge that appealed to Daedalus's pride, but also terrified his cautious nature. For years, the idea remained just the tan idea, a series of sketches, a mad dream, until the day came when escape was no longer a desire, but a necessity. The Athenian hero Theseus arrived on Crete, famously navigated the labyrinth with the help of Minos's daughter, Ariadne, and slew the Minotaur. In the chaos that followed, Theseus and Ariadne escaped. King Minos, enraged and paranoid, believed that Daedalus must have helped them. After all, who else could have revealed the secret to solving his perfect maze? The king's favor vanished overnight. Daedalus and Icarus were no longer valued guests. They were prisoners, traitors. They were seized and thrown into the very labyrinth that Daedalus had built, left to die in the dark, winding corridors of his own creation. Now, escape was their only chance of survival. The mad dream of flight had to become a reality. Trapped within his own masterpiece of despair, Daedalus's mind worked with a frantic, brilliant clarity. He knew the labyrinth's secrets. He led his son through the bewildering passages to a hidden, high-walled courtyard, open to the sky, a place he had built as a secret workshop within the prison itself. Here their desperate work began. "The king may rule the land and sea," Daedalus told his son, his eyes gleaming with a feverish light. "But he does not rule the air. We will go that way." For months they gathered materials. Feathers from the birds that strayed into their prison, their bodies collected from the labyrinth's floor. They arranged them meticulously, from the smallest downy feather to the largest, strongest flight feather, creating a pattern that mimicked the wing of a great eagle. Icarus worked alongside his father with an infectious enthusiasm. He did not see the danger. He saw only the adventure, the glorious promise of freedom. He would chase the feathers as they were sorted, laugh as he tried to catch them. His youthful joy a stark contrast to his father's grim, obsessive focus. Daedalus watched him. He saw his son's natural grace, his effortless strength as he helped bend the wooden frames. He saw the pure, unadulterated joy in Icarus's eyes as he looked at the sky, and the old poison dripped into his heart once more. He was creating the means of their freedom, but he was also creating a vessel for his son's unbridled spirit, a spirit that, he feared, would soon soar far beyond his own. He was the master inventor, the genius who conceived of flight. But Icarus, he knew, would be the one to truly master it. The boy had a natural affinity for the air, a dancer's grace that Daedalus, a man of cold logic and heavy secrets, could never possess. He saw the future in his mind's eye. They would escape, yes, but the story that would be told would not be of Daedalus the genius. It would be of Icarus the magnificent, the first man to fly, the boy who danced with the sun. His own name, his own legacy, would become a footnote in his son's story. The same fear that had driven him to murder his nephew Talos now returned, whispering its venomous lies in the heart of the labyrinth. He could not, would not be surpassed again, especially not by his own son. And so, as he completed the final stages of their creation, he made a small, secret, and murderous alteration. There were 2 sets of wings, one for himself and one for Icarus. He bound the feathers to the frames with strong linen thread, and then he secured them with wax. For his own wings, he used the finest, strongest beeswax, a substance he knew could withstand the warmth of the upper altitudes. But for Icarus's wings, he did something different. He created a special blend. He mixed the beeswax with a softer, less stable honeycomb, creating a compound that looked and felt identical, but had a much lower melting point. It was a subtle act of sabotage, a flaw woven into the very heart of their hope, a betrayal so cunning that no one, not even a god, would ever suspect it. It was, perhaps, his most brilliant and most monstrous invention. The day of their escape arrived. Daedalus carefully fitted the wings onto his son's shoulders, his hands lingering for a moment. He looked into Icarus's eyes, bright with excitement and trust, and his own heart must have felt a pang of something guilt, perhaps, or a flicker of love that fought against the cold serpent of his pride. It was then that he gave his famous warning. And when we re-examine this warning, knowing his true intent, the words take on a chilling, sinister new meaning. "Icarus, my son," he said, his voice grave and solemn, "you must follow me closely. Do not fly too low, or the dampness from the sea will weigh down your wings. And do not fly too high, or the heat from the sun will melt the wax." On the surface, it is the sound advice of a concerned father. But it is a lie, wrapped in a half-truth. The warning about flying too low was real, a necessary instruction to ensure their initial escape. But the warning about the sun was not a caution. It was a suggestion. It was a psychological trigger. Daedalus knew his son. He knew his adventurous spirit, his love of pushing boundaries. To tell a boy like Icarus, "Do not fly too high," was like planting a seed of temptation in his mind. He was not just warning him of a danger, he was pointing him towards it. He was setting the stage, crafting the narrative of his son's accidental death. He was creating his alibi before the crime had even been committed. Icarus, in his youthful innocence, embraced his father. "I will be careful, father. I understand." He felt no suspicion, only gratitude and love for the man who had given him the sky. They stood at the edge of the labyrinth's highest wall. Daedalus demonstrated the motion, flapping the great, feathered wings, rising awkwardly at first, then finding his rhythm. He was a creator, not a natural. He was a man of the earth, forcing his will upon the air. Then it was Icarus's turn. He leaped from the wall, and he did not just fly, he soared. He was a natural. His movements were fluid, graceful, joyful. He laughed, a sound of pure, unadulterated freedom that echoed across the Cretan sky. He circled his father, performing dips and turns, a young eagle reveling in its newfound power. Daedalus watched him, his heart a cold, heavy stone in his chest. His fears had been realized. He was a crow, flying alongside a magnificent bird of paradise. The world would only have eyes for his son. The sabotage had to work. The story had to be sealed. "Follow me," Daedalus cried, setting a course away from Crete, over the endless blue of the Aegean Sea. And Icarus, full of love and trust, followed. The trap was set. They flew for what felt like an eternity, the island of Crete shrinking to a speck behind them. The world opened up, a breathtaking panorama of sea and sky. Icarus was euphoric. This was true freedom. This was life. He forgot the labyrinth. He forgot King Minos. In the exhilaration of the moment, he began to forget his father's warning. He saw his father flying ahead, a steady, methodical figure. But Icarus did not want to be steady. He wanted to dance. He began to climb higher, testing the limits of his new body. The air grew thinner, cleaner. He felt the warmth of the sun on his back, a pleasant, life-giving heat. He felt invincible. He looked down and saw the world of men, small and insignificant. He looked up and saw the sun, a golden chariot in the heavens, and he felt a kinship with the gods. Daedalus, flying below and ahead of him, watched him climb. He kept a steady pace, never looking back, never calling out another warning. He was leading his son towards his fate. He knew the wax on his own wings was holding firm. He knew, with the cold certainty of an engineer, that the wax on his son's wings was beginning to soften. Icarus felt the first sign of trouble as a slight looseness in his right wing. A few of the smaller feathers fluttered free. He paid it no mind, thinking it was just the wind. He was laughing, calling out to his father, though his words were lost in the rush of air. But then, a larger feather detached, spiraling down into the sea below. He felt a dip, a loss of control. A flicker of fear touched his heart. He tried to angle his wings to descend, but the response was sluggish. The heat of the sun was no longer pleasant. It was a malevolent, focused fire. He could feel the wax now, warm and sticky, losing its grip. More feathers peeled away, a cascade of white against the brilliant blue of the sky. The beautiful, perfect structure that had given him freedom was now disintegrating around him. Panic seized him. He cried out, "Father! Father! Help me!" Daedalus must have heard him. He was not so far away, but he did not turn back. He did not slow down. He simply continued on his steady, unwavering course, a dark silhouette against the horizon. He was the inventor watching his most flawed creation perform exactly as designed. Icarus flapped his arms desperately, but the great wings were now skeletal frames, stripped of their purpose. He was no longer flying, he was plummeting. The wind, which had been his playmate moments before, now shrieked past him, a funeral dirge. He saw the sea rushing up to meet him. He saw the indifferent sun, the distant shape of his father, and in his final, terrifying moments, perhaps he finally understood the truth. He hit the water with a force that shattered his body. The waves, indifferent to the tragedy of gods and men, closed over him without a sound. Icarus, the boy who flew, was gone. Only when he was sure it was over did Daedalus circle back. He flew low over the sea, his face a mask of practiced grief. He called his son's name, his voice filled with a convincing, theatrical anguish. "Icarus, my son, where are you?" He spotted the feathers floating on the surface of the water, the last remnants of his son's glorious, doomed flight. He landed on a nearby island, which would forever after be known as Icaria. He waited, and soon, the tide brought the broken body of his son to the shore. He performed the rites of a grieving father. He buried the boy, building a tomb for him with his own clever hands. He wept tears that, perhaps, were even real, for he had loved his son. But he had loved his own legacy, his own pride, more. And then he told the story that the world would remember. He told of his brilliant invention. He told of his clear, fatherly warning. And he told of his foolish, arrogant son, a boy who, in his youthful hubris, had disobeyed his father and flown too close to the sun. It was a perfect story, cautionary tale, a simple, elegant explanation for a terrible tragedy. It placed the blame squarely on the dead, on the boy who could no longer defend himself. And it painted Daedalus as the tragic, wise, long-suffering father. It was his final and most successful act of deception. A partridge, watching from a nearby tree, chirped loudly. It was the spirit of his murdered nephew, Talos, the only other soul in the cosmos who truly knew the darkness that lurked in the great inventor's heart. It was a witness to his second, and even more unforgivable, crime. Daedalus looked at the bird, and for a moment, his mask of grief slipped, revealing the cold, hard face of a killer. He had escaped the labyrinth. He was free, but he had purchased his freedom with the life of his own child. He had flown to safety on wings of betrayal, leaving behind a legacy not of genius, but of murder. So we are left with a new, more terrible version of the myth. The story of Icarus is not a lesson about the dangers of ambition. It is a lesson about the corrosive nature of jealousy, a poison that can rot the heart of even the most brilliant of men. Icarus was not a fool. He was a victim, a bright, joyful spirit whose only crime was to be born the son of a man who could not bear to be eclipsed. His wings did not fail because of his proximity to the sun. They failed because of his proximity to his father. And Daedalus? He is the true monster of this story, a genius who created wonders, but whose soul was a labyrinth of darkness far more complex and inescapable than the one he built of stone. He is a chilling reminder that the greatest threats often come not from the gods above or the beasts below, but from the quiet, smiling betrayals of those we are taught to love and trust the most. He did not just build the wings, he weaponized them against his own blood. The tragedy of Icarus is not that he flew too high. It is that he was never meant to land at all. We look to the sky for gods and to the depths for monsters, but sometimes the most terrible darkness resides within the human heart. Thank you for joining us on this re-examination of a timeless tale. If you believe there is more to the story than what we've been told, show your support by liking this video, subscribing to Mythos Unveiled, and hitting the notification bell so you never miss another journey into the shadows of legend. Tell us in the comments, what other myths do you believe hide a darker, unspoken truth? Until next time, remember that the fall is not always the fault of the one who flies, but sometimes of the one who built the wings.